A special team of UFO investigators, including engineers, doctors, and even the late Dr. Alan Hynek of Project Blue Book fame, studied this called the most famous abduction case in Miami history. On the evening of January 3rd, 1979, gift shop proprietor Filiberto Cardenas agreed to accompany his friend Fernando Marti on a trip to the outskirts of Hialeah, Miami, to source barbecue ingredients. As Fernando said that he was feeling tired, Filiberto ended up driving him, his wife Myrta, and 13-year-old daughter Isabel to 2 farms. Negotiating rural roads in bad condition, after some time, Filiberto's station wagon began to lose power and its engine died, not responding at all to attempts to restart it. The men got out and Fernando opened the car hood but couldn't locate the failure. After several unsuccessful attempts to restart the car, the pair were both sprawled under the hood when they realised that the engine was flashing red and violet light in sequence. This was accompanied by a strange sound, like a swarm of bees. As the sound and the light illuminating the engine increased, the whole car started to shake. As an earthquake survivor, Mrs. Marti pulled Isabel down across the car seat and covered her with her own body while screaming in panic. Hearing her cries, Filiberto tried to run to assist but became paralysed, feeling as though something restrained and impeded his actions. Fernando tried to take cover under the hood but also found himself immobilised, his feet sticking up in the air. Filiberto felt as if the force that paralysed him was lifting him and suspending him. He began to shout, "Don't take me, don't take me," as he was lifted off the ground. The noise and the light then ceased and things seemed back to normal when Fernando emerged from under the hood and looked up at the sky to see what he observed as a bulky object or UFO that rose and then moved away. Full of fear, he jumped into the driver's seat and eventually started the engine, which was running very weakly, but he managed to return to the highway. He stopped at the first service station on Upper 29th Street, from where he called the police, then called Filiberto's wife Iris and told her a light took Filiberto away. When the three reached the town of Hialeah, they spotted a police patrol car where Fernando again explained what had just happened. The police initially assumed that Filiberto would be found lost or unconscious, while Fernando, feeling confused, thought that he may be mistaken about what he had just witnessed and returned to look for his friend. The police tried to request the airbase at Homestead to send out an aeroplane or helicopter with lights to the location of the incident. While this was all happening, Filiberto was becoming aware of the sound of tyres running on pavement. He found himself in the middle of a different highway, the Tamiami Trail, which was about 16 kilometres south of where he had vanished 2 hours before. The police officers who found Filiberto at first thought him inebriated or an assault victim who had been left on the highway. They were unable to communicate with him because of the language barrier and the condition he was in, but searched his pockets and found ID. Filiberto is fluent in only Spanish, having been raised in Cuba. They took him to the police station where Iris and Fernando were waiting. There, according to one official, something very unusual happened when, on the formal report, under type of offence, was written "Close Encounter of the Third Kind." This may have been the first time in the US that the police admitted in an official report that an abduction by a UFO had actually taken place. During later hypnotic regression, Filiberto disclosed that after having been paralysed by a combination of the mysterious light and sound, he woke up in a seat that seemed to hold him in place by a kind of suction which impeded all his movements. He found himself in a small room surrounded by 3 strange figures, one of whom approached carrying a strange kind of helmet, which he raised and placed on Filiberto's head. The helmet seemed to be lined with small needles that pierced his skull, reaching down to his shoulders. The beings then tried to communicate with Filiberto, initially speaking in a language that sounded like German, then, when they realized that he did not understand, rotating a button on the right side of his chest and speaking in English. When Filiberto indicated that he still did not understand, again the strange being rotated the button and proceeded to speak in Spanish with a Portuguese or Italian accent. During this process, the beings continued conducting tests on Filiberto's body, eventually leaving 108 marks as evidence of these tests. The beings then took him through to another larger room where, on a high seat resembling a throne, sat one of their kind wearing a cape. This individual, who seemed to be in charge, addressed Filiberto in perfect Spanish while also transmitting ideas telepathically. Their conversation revolved around the subjects of human beings and humanity. On the walls were projected images, like large television pictures, showing scenes from the human past, present and future. Following this, the beings then opened another port and Filiberto was carried to a small room where he was again placed in a seat, immobilizing him with suction. He was now inside a small craft that was then discharged from the mothership. Near the end of this flight, Filiberto could observe what appeared to be a stretch of narrow beach approaching as the UFOs proceeded to plunge into the sea. His perception was obscured by the massive velocity at which the craft was travelling, veering to the right and then beginning to lose speed. Ahead, Filiberto could now discern a tunnel with walls that seemed illuminated, as if phosphorescent. There the ship entered, eventually coming to stop in a large cavern that was completely dry and, he noticed, did not have any stalactites or stalagmites. Inside the huge space was a place formed of rock where he observed 2 symbols, one of them having the form of a serpent. One was as large as an electric light pole, while the other was similar but smaller. The ETs disembarked from the ship with Filiberto and took him to a rock where they allowed him to sit down. They opened a huge door from where a number of humans exited. Meanwhile, Filiberto was feeling as though he could not breathe, with a pressure on his chest, while the sensations and odours around him were very unfamiliar and strange. At this, a person approached Filiberto and said, "Welcome," speaking to him in perfect Spanish with a South American accent. The individual looked human and informed Filiberto that he was from Earth and had been for some time working with the aliens. He added that Filiberto should be happy as he would be receiving some instructions from a human being, quote, "like us." As if these events were not bemusing enough, the alien beings took Filiberto through another door and toward a street of what appeared to be a city, where they crossed and entered a small building. Here Filiberto felt himself sucked up against a wall, which then revolved a turn and became a kind of table. From the walls there emerged mechanical arms containing instruments with which they examined and tested most of his body. Eventually they let him get up and dressed again, whereupon they demonstrated, using the wall televisions, new and different events that were going to occur to humanity. He was then taken to a large room where there stood a UFO craft in a vertical position, like one of our big rockets. Taking him inside this, they encountered there 3 more entities who again placed him in a suction seat, then set up the controls and readied the ship for departure. Filiberto was unable to see what was happening outside, and after a short trip, the door of the craft opened and Filiberto was let out of the ship, finding himself in a pasture. On January 3rd, 1979, Filiberto underwent hypnotic regression, during which he disclosed future predictions for humanity provided by the aliens. These included the disastrous 1985 earthquake that destroyed part of Mexico City, the loss of coastal areas in California succumbing to coastal erosion, the AIDS epidemic, and the Reagan presidency. There was suggestion of the aliens collaborating with the Chinese government, and they also predicted the 1981 assassination of Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat, leading to Middle East conflict, which they said could put the whole planet in peril. It was about 6 weeks later, on the night of February 21st, 1979, that Filiberto and his wife Iris could not sleep and decided to revisit the place where Filiberto had been abducted. At around 5 a.m, his second encounter with the UFO ship and its occupants took place. After returning home, Filiberto called researcher Sanchez Ozao and reported what had happened. That afternoon, Sanchez Ozao found out that people at Miami International Airport had witnessed a UFO on that morning, observing a large mothership and an array of smaller objects moving around it. The main craft seemed fixed in the sky and was round with 3 lights, one very white, one yellow, and the third a more opaque white, which also pulsated. Beside it were 2 other round smaller ships with just 1 light each. Sanchez Ozao's group members were able to localize the mothership with the other UFOs directly above the spot where Filiberto had been picked up, where only hours before the second encounter of Filiberto and Iris had occurred. Iris Cardenas later reported that on the right breast of the alien suits, they wore an emblem which comprised a serpent in the form of an S on top of a wide X-shaped cross. The Cardenas' second encounter is unusual in that a second person, Iris, went voluntarily to the encounter. Also rare was that they received news of the UFO sightings at the same time and place from independent witnesses, giving their second encounter credibility. 6 years later, on December 6, 1985, Filiberto claimed that he was again abducted and conveyed to the same base under the sea. On March 30, 1986, Filiberto again underwent hypnotic regression. As well as confirming his previous encounters and experiences, he described further predictions imparted to him by the aliens.